Just over a year ago, I hit publish on the very first episode of A Cup of Hope. And honestly, I thought I was just launching a podcast. But looking back, I can see that God was also using this podcast to teach me more about hope, growth, rest, limits, wisdom, and beginning again. This year has not looked exactly the way I expected. And honestly, maybe that is part of the gift. Sometimes reflection helps us see what God has been doing in places that felt messy while we were living them. So today, for episode 50, I want to pause, look back, and talk about what I'm learning 1 year later. Welcome to A Cup of Hope, the podcast for women ready to create clarity and confidence in their life and money. I'm your host, Sherry Lynn, a life and money coach and your hope-filled strategist. Each week, we'll talk about the messy middle of life, faith, finances, freedom, and finding your purpose, all with truth, encouragement, and practical tools that you can use today. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome back to A Cup of Hope. I'm Sherry Lynn, and today is a special episode. This is episode 50, and it marks 1 year of this podcast. That feels exciting, it feels humbling, and honestly, it feels a little surreal. When I chose the closing line for this podcast, God can take the broken pieces of your story and create something more beautiful than you ever imagined. I believed that. I have lived that. But I don't think I realized how much I would continue to live it out through this podcast itself. Because this year has reminded me again and again that God is not only working in the finished product, He is working in the process. He's working in the learning curve. He's working in the setbacks. And He is working in the places where we have to stop pretending we are machines and remember that we are human. Today's cup of hope is this: God can be faithfully growing something in you even when your season does not look the way you expected. Peace grows when we stop trying to control everything and learn to live wisely within that reality. Isaiah 43:18 and 19 says, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing." I don't think that means we never look back. I think it means we do not live stuck there. Sometimes we look back so that we can see more clearly what God has been doing, and then we move forward with renewed hope. So today, I want to share 4 reflections from this first year of A Cup of Hope. When I launched this podcast, I knew there would be a learning curve, but I don't think I fully understood how many skills I was going to have to learn all at the same time. I thought by this point I would be more organized, more polished, more consistent. I thought I would have better systems, and to be fair, a lot of that has happened. I do know how to use Audacity now, at least basically, and that is a very real win because a little over a year ago, I didn't even know what Audacity was. I probably thought it was just a character trait. And honestly, maybe it is because this podcast has required some audacity. It has required learning how to record, edit, upload, write show notes, create episode art, connect the podcast to my website, write emails, figure out what in the world I was doing with blogs, free resources, and marketing. Those were some of the outward skills. But underneath those outward skills, God was developing inward things too. Tenacity, resourcefulness, diligence, perseverance, the willingness to be bad at something long enough to improve, the humility to ask questions, the patience to learn one layer at a time. And I think this happens in all kinds of ways. Sometimes we might think we are learning just an outward skill, but God may be growing something deeper in us through the process. That is the part I am still learning. Growth is not always comfortable. We tend to want life to feel easier if you're anything like me. We want the system, the rhythm, the routine, or the plan that will finally make everything smooth. And sometimes things do get more smooth. But smoother does not mean effortless. Growth often reveals the next layer. You learn one thing, and then you realize there is another thing you did not know. You build one system, and then you realize that system needs support. You make progress in one area, and then another area shows you where you still need wisdom, margin, or help. It can feel like 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, but that does not always mean nothing is working. Sometimes it means growth is revealing the next layer. And I think this is so important because we often think growth is going to make everything easier. We think, once I get the system in place, once I figure out this rhythm, once I finally get organized, then things will feel easy. And sometimes they do get easier, but growth does not eliminate our humanity. It does not remove our need for rest. It does not mean we suddenly have unlimited capacity. It does not mean life will stop being unpredictable. And that has been one of the biggest lessons for me this year. I do not live in Eden. Heaven is my only perfect home. But right now, I live in the in-between, between these 2 perfect gardens. And that means I'm learning how to live faithfully in a world where things break, plans change, energy runs out, and people have real needs, including me. So let me turn that back to you for just a moment. Where have you expected growth to make you less human? Here's what I mean. Where have you thought, if I were just more organized, more mature, more disciplined, or more spiritual, I wouldn't need so much rest, support, margin, or grace? Maybe growth is not about needing less. Maybe growth is learning about stewarding reality with wisdom. So that is what I thought this year would look like. I thought growth would make things smoother, and in some ways it did. But growth did not remove my need for margin, and that is where reality became such a good teacher. In the beginning, each week was a lot, but it was also so encouraging. There was the excitement of learning, the energy of starting something new, and the hope that maybe this thing I had dreamed about for so long was actually becoming real. And by the time Thanksgiving came around, I had reached a place that felt amazing. I was about a month ahead. For someone producing a weekly podcast while also working full-time, coaching, serving in other ministries at my church, and managing real life, that felt like a very big deal. And then Christmas came. I had plans for that break. I wanted to rest, reset, work on a few meaningful projects, and protect some quiet space because I knew that solitude was what I needed to recharge. But finances were tight, and I had an opportunity to make some extra money. So I said yes. Now, I'm not shaming myself for that. I did need the money. But looking back, I can see that I did not fully count the cost. Because the cost was not only time. The cost was rest. The cost was solitude. The cost was quiet. The cost was margin. And by the time spring break was over, I had not refilled the way I needed to. I had spent down the margin I had built. And in January, I found myself back in that weekend to weekend, episode to episode rhythm. It reminded me of what happens financially when someone gets to January and the credit card bill arrives. Maybe December was full. Maybe it was beautiful. Maybe there were good reasons for the spending. But eventually, the bill comes due. And for me, this was like a January credit card bill, but with my time and energy. I had used up the margin, but life kept being life. Extra responsibilities came. I broke my foot. Then there was a water leak. Plans shifted. Things took longer than I expected. And the buffer I thought I would have was gone. That was humbling because I had to choose. Was I going to beat myself up? Was I going to call myself a failure? Was I going to decide that because I had fallen behind, the whole thing was ruined? Or was I going to practice what I teach? Was I going to slow down, tell the truth, look at reality, and keep taking the next right step? And just to be honest, that can still be a mental battle. For example, I teach managing your calendar. I teach budgeting your money. I can teach women how to slow down and map out what is actually happening. And still, I have to remind myself that I have time to slow down. I have to say to myself, Sherry, if you stop long enough to map this out, you will actually go further, faster. I know this is true. I teach that this is true. And yet, I still have to choose to practice it. So here is the lesson I am taking from this part of the story. A system without margin is still fragile. A calendar without margin is fragile. A budget without margin is fragile. A body without rest is fragile. And a soul without quiet is fragile. And maybe you have felt that too. Maybe things were technically working until one unexpected bill, one sick child, one hard conversation, one broken appliance, one family crisis, or even one disrupted week, and it revealed how thin the margin really was. But here's the good news. It does not mean you failed. It may simply mean you're a human. And you know what? Humans need margin. So that is what actually happened. I had built some margin, but I did not protect it. And when life kept being life, I had to face the truth. I could either beat myself up for not doing this perfectly, or I could slow down and practice what I teach. And that is where God began teaching me in ways I did not expect. Here is what has been so beautiful to me. God was not surprised by any of this. He was not sitting in heaven wringing his hands over my podcast schedule. He was not disappointed that I had to learn the same lessons again that I teach other people. He was so very faithful. And one of the clearest ways I saw his faithfulness was through the timing of what I was studying in Scripture. At the beginning of the year, I started the Bible recap, reading chronologically through Scripture. At the same time, our Bible study at church started a study on wisdom from the book of Proverbs. And the timing mattered because I was struggling with a decision I had prayed about, sought counsel about, stepped into with faith, but it was turning out to be much harder than I expected. I remember telling the ladies in my Bible study group, I think I made the wrong decision. And then in that very first lesson on wisdom, we talked about how very often when we ask God for wisdom, what we really want is certainty. We want him to say, this is the right decision, and if you choose it, everything will go smoothly. But that is not wisdom. That is a guarantee. Wisdom still requires faith. It asks us to seek God, listen, take counsel, then make the best decision we can, and keep walking in faith even if the path is harder than we expected. At the same time, as I was reading through Genesis and the story of the Israelites, I kept seeing a similar pattern. God provided. His people struggled to trust, and still, God remained faithful. That was what I needed to see. Not that the path was easy, not that the people were perfect, but that God was faithful. Then, later in the spring, we did a study on Sabbath called Breathe by Priscilla Shirer, and it reminded me that Sabbath is not a reward for finishing everything. It is a gift for free people. Another book that I read this spring was called You Are Free, and it gave me one question that stopped me in my tracks. It said, what if your purpose is to be loved by God? Not to perform, not to produce, not to prove, but to be loved by God. All of those threads came together in one lesson that I am still learning. Being human is not failure. Having limits is not failure. Having needs is not failure. Needing rest is not failure. Needing money, time, solitude, food, sleep, support, and grace, these are not failure. It is reality. And reality is not something that we are called to deny. It is something we are called to steward. As I was thinking about this idea of wisdom versus certainty, it reminded me of kayaking. My family and I love to kayak. But when I think about the idea of control, I actually think of something that is more like a monorail. It's on a track. It only goes where the track goes. It stops where the track stops. It is rigid and predictable, but only as long as everything is working perfectly. And I think sometimes we try to build our lives like this. We think we want everything on a track. We want the schedule to run perfectly. We want the plan to hold. We want no interruptions, no unexpected expenses, no emotional needs, no hard conversations, no change, no disruption. But real life is not like monorail. Real life is so much more like kayaking on a river. There is direction, there are boundaries, there is a current, but there's also movement. There is adjustment. There are rocks. There are places where you need to steer. There are places where you might need to slow down. There are times where you may need to pull over to the side and take a break. And that is not failure. It is wisdom. Peace is not getting life perfectly on track. Peace is learning to navigate reality with wisdom, trust, and flexibility. So the goal is not control. The goal is faithful stewardship inside of reality. So what about you? Where are you trying to force your life onto a track when God may be inviting you to learn how to navigate a river? Where do you need wisdom instead of certainty? Where do you need margin instead of more pressure? Where do you need to remember that being human is not failure? And that brings me to what I'm carrying forward. Because when I stop and look back, I do not only see what was unfinished, I can also see what God was growing. As I look back over this first year of podcasting, one of the biggest gifts has been reflection. Because if I only look at what is unfinished, I could easily feel discouraged. There are things I thought would be done by now. They are not. There are rhythms I thought would be more consistent. There are projects I thought would be further along. But when I stop and look back honestly, I can see growth. So much growth. I can see skills I did not have a year ago. I can see courage I did not have a year ago. I can see clarity that was missing a year ago. I can see places where God was developing things in me that I could not see at the time. And maybe that is true for you too. Maybe you look at your life and you see the things that did not happen, the path you did not take, the degree that you did not finish, the dream that got delayed, the relationship that did not become what you prayed it would be, the years you poured into your family, your children, your ministry, your caregiving, or just surviving. And maybe when you look at all of that, you're tempted to believe that you are behind. But what if God has been developing things in you that you could not yet see? What if He has been growing wisdom, compassion, resilience, discernment, adaptability, courage, and faith? I think about the 22-year-old version of me who wanted to go to grad school and become a counselor. That was a real desire, but life did not unfold that way. And there was a little grief in that. But now, here I am in my 50s, and in this season, I get to spend so much of my life investing in the next generation of counselors, encouraging women, coaching women through their finances, walking with women through messy and broken places, and helping them see there is still hope. And I can look back and see that God has grown compassion in me that I did not have at 22. He has grown empathy. He has grown wisdom. He has grown tenderness. He has grown resilience. he has grown a deeper understanding that life is hard and God is good. Romans 8 reminds us that God works all these things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And later in that same chapter, we are reminded that nothing can separate us from the love of God. Not hardship, not grief, not delay, not disappointment, not the things that did not happen the way we hoped. And we have this beautiful picture of restoration that God can restore what the locusts have eaten in the book of Joel. That does not mean every story wraps up neatly. It does not mean every loss disappears. It does not mean every painful thing suddenly makes sense. But it does mean our pain, our detours, our imperfect offerings are not beyond his reach. And that is part of what I'm carrying forward. This podcast has reached people in ways I never expected. At the time of this recording, women and men, mainly women, in 33 countries have listened to A Cup of Hope. That blows my mind. It humbles me. Because I know that this has not been perfect. I have been learning as I go. I know I have had to start again more than once. But God, he has been so very faithful. And I want this podcast to continue being a place where we tell the truth about life, money, brokenness, healing, faith, wisdom, and hope. I want it to be a place where women remember they are not alone. A place they can slow down, breathe, reflect, and then take the next faithful step. And so this year, I'm not trying to launch everything. This is so important for me to say out loud. I'm not trying to do every good idea all at once. I am practicing faithfully stewarding the next right thing. And for me, one of those next right things is Beautifully Broken, a Christ-centered group coaching space for women navigating the heartbreak of intimate betrayal and deception. That work matters deeply to me because I know what it is like to need a safe place to tell the truth. I know what it is like to need support, wisdom, and hope when life feels shattered. And I believe God can meet women in those broken places with compassion, truth, and grace. So as I look ahead, I'm not promising a perfect year. I'm not promising a perfectly polished podcast. And I'm not promising that life will stop interrupting. But I am hopeful because I am learning that hope is not built on perfect circumstances. Hope is built on the perfect faithfulness of God. Here's your one last sip. Your life is not wasted. God can use the detours, the delays, and the imperfect places to grow something beautiful. You may not be behind in the way you think you are. You may be in a season where God is forming wisdom, compassion, courage, and purpose in places you cannot yet fully see. So do not despise the slow growth. Do not dismiss the hidden years. Don't assume that because the path looks different than you expected, God has forgotten you. He is faithful in the process. He is faithful in the rebuilding. He is faithful in the beginning again. As we grow deeper together this week, I want to invite you to take 10 minutes and reflect on this question. Where have I been so focused on what is unfinished that I may be missing what God has already been growing inside of me? Write that question down. Sit with it. Pray through it. And then write down 3 places where you have grown, adapted, endured, learned, or seen God's faithfulness over the past year. These do not have to be huge. Maybe you made one hard phone call. Maybe you asked for help. Maybe you started budgeting. Maybe you set a boundary. Maybe you rested when normally you would have just pushed through. Maybe you told the truth. Maybe you began again. Friend, name it, because reflection helps us notice grace. And sometimes noticing grace gives us courage to keep going. If this episode encouraged you, I would love for you to share it with one woman who needs to remember that her life is not wasted. Maybe she feels behind. Maybe she feels like her story has taken too many detours. Maybe she is looking at what is unfinished and forgetting to notice what God has been growing all along. Send this episode to her and remind her she is not alone. And if you are a woman who is walking through the heartbreak of betrayal or broken trust in your marriage, I want you to know that you do not have to walk that road alone either. Beautifully Broken is the one new thing I am prayerfully preparing and stewarding this year. It is a Christ-centered group coaching space for women navigating intimate betrayal and deception. Applications are now open, and you can find more information in the show notes. As I mark 1 year of A Cup of Hope, I am so grateful. Grateful for what God has done. Grateful for what He is teaching me. Grateful for every single woman who has listened, shared, prayed, encouraged, or simply kept showing up. And honestly, this podcast has become one of the places where I am watching God live out the very words I say each week. So remember, God can take the broken pieces of your story and create something more beautiful than you could ever imagine. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining me today on A Cup of Hope. If this episode encouraged you, would you share it with a friend and subscribe so you never miss an episode? You'll find today's resources and next steps in the show notes. Until next time, I'm Sherry Lynn, and I want you to remember this. Hope is always available, and your next step matters, because God can take the broken pieces of your story and create something more beautiful than you could ever imagine.